The tension in the chamber was already sharp enough to slice through. But when Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, papers in hand, expression controlled but simmering, everyone knew something was coming. The cameras were rolling, the audience was quiet, and even the analysts on the panel stopped whispering. They had read her face before. That look meant she wasn't just prepared, she was loaded with facts, ready to fire. Across from her, Chief Justice John Roberts sat with that familiar, calm, judicial posture, the kind that usually keeps a room in line without him ever raising his voice. He expected a routine exchange. He expected boundaries. But he didn't expect Jasmine Crockett to walk in with evidence no one had publicly confronted him with yet. As she began speaking, it was slow, deliberate, controlled. She laid the groundwork. Texas voting roll purges, inconsistent legal interpretations, and the federal implications that had gone unaddressed for far too long. Her tone wasn't loud, but it carried a kind of pressure like the quiet before a microphone blows. Roberts, perhaps sensing where she was headed, tried to interject. "Congresswoman, if I may clarify," she didn't stop. She didn't even look up at him yet. She just kept reading, her voice steady as she laid out her first set of numbers, the counties with the highest purge rates, who they targeted, and the real-world impact that had been quietly minimized. Roberts shifted his posture. "Congresswoman, I need to remind you," that's when she finally lifted her eyes, and the entire room stilled. She wasn't rude. She wasn't heated. She was commanding. "Chief Justice, with respect," she said, "I am presenting facts that were dismissed during the last review. Cutting me off won't change them." It was the first moment the atmosphere shifted. Reporters leaned forward, sensing the start of something different, a line no one else had dared to cross so cleanly. She continued, this time without even looking back at her notes. It was all memory, all precision. She spoke about the discrepancies between lower court rulings, the unusual timing of federal responses, and the communities who ended up bearing the cost of those decisions. Her tone remained measured, but her words were sharp enough to draw blood. Roberts raised his hand slightly. "Congresswoman, the judiciary cannot comment on ongoing." She immediately responded, "I'm not asking you to comment. I'm asking you to acknowledge the pattern." And then she revealed the first key Document 10 internal review note showing that concerns had been raised months earlier, but never addressed. Cameras clicked. Pens hit paper. Even the legal analysts on the sidelines exchanged looks. That wasn't information they'd seen before. Roberts hesitated for the first time. Jasmine kept going. She laid the second fact on the table. The data from the last audit cycle. Numbers showing that the justification for certain decisions didn't match the actual evidence. She didn't exaggerate. She didn't dramatize it. She just showed the receipts. No one expected her to bring this openly. Roberts attempted again. "Congresswoman, these findings are taken out of procedural context." She countered instantly. "Context doesn't erase impact. If the courts fail to act, Texas voters face consequences that are never corrected later." The room grew heavier. Even the quiet rustling of papers stopped. Then came the moment that went. Viral. Jasmine reached into the folder and pulled out one. More set of numbers pointing to the demographic disparities that had been buried in technical language. She placed them on the table, slid them forward, and said, "These are the people who were affected. These are the people who were told the system protects them. And these are the people who were failed while legal arguments dragged on." Roberts tried again to control the conversation. But this time, his voice was noticeably tighter. "Congresswoman, the judiciary operates under specific." She cut him off, not rudely, not loudly, but with absolute authority. "Chief Justice, the facts operate under reality. And reality doesn't pause because it's inconvenient." For the first time, Roberts didn't immediately respond. The silence in the chamber was intense. Journalists typed furiously. Commentators exchanged wide-eyed glances. Crockett had not only taken control of the exchange, she had done it by revealing information that forced the entire conversation into new territory. She leaned back slightly, her tone shifting from pointed to steady, almost calm but still unwavering. "When you try to cut me off," she said, "it doesn't change what these documents show. It only highlights how long these facts have gone unaddressed." And that was the moment, the exact moment the clip exploded online. Because in those few seconds, Jasmine Crockett didn't just challenge the most authoritative legal figure in the country. She exposed the facts he tried to steer away from. And the country saw it happen live. The instant John Roberts tried to interrupt Jasmine Crockett, the energy in the studio shifted, but what happened next was even more revealing. Jasmine didn't just pause. She recalibrated. Her eyes narrowed not in anger, but in precision, like someone mentally lining up targets. Before firing off undeniable truths, one by one, viewers watching from home could sense it too. The attempted interruption didn't throw her off. It activated her. She leaned forward slightly, her voice steady but sharpened, and continued speaking as if Roberts hadn't said a word, not disrespectfully, but with the confidence of someone who knew her facts were stronger than any detour he tried to force. "Let me finish," she said calmly. And the studio fell silent. Even Roberts backed down without a pastille. Ruby kissed, Ruby kiss. Ruby kiss, only Ruby kiss. Only Ruby kiss has the luxurious texture that caves seven-day eyes. A light on the second attempt. That's when Jasmine launched into the key facts she had been holding. Not dramatic, not emotional, but ironclad, documented, and devastatingly direct. She began laying out timelines, legislative history, and the exact points that had been glossed over in the conversation. And she did it with the kind of clarity that left no space for spin. People online later said it felt like watching a lawyer surgically dismantle a bad argument, and honestly, it was exactly that. As Roberts listened, the shift in his posture was impossible to ignore. The attempted interruption had been his effort to redirect the conversation away from territory that was about to get uncomfortable. He wasn't used to a guest who didn't derail under pressure. But Jasmine didn't derail, she accelerated. Her delivery didn't rise in volume, but in authority. Every fact she laid out built on the previous one. Every example tightened the argument at one point. She even referenced exact dates while explaining how certain policies had been mischaracterized on air for months. She wasn't guessing. She was citing, and viewers could tell the difference immediately. The comment section on the live stream exploded. Let her speak. She's literally the only one with receipts. Roberts tried it and failed. This is why they're scared of her. Inside the studio, Roberts gave a polite nod, the standard host reaction when unexpectedly outmatched. But the others on the panel exchanged glances, the kind that happen when someone realizes the conversation has just gone somewhere far more serious than planned. Jasmine didn't slow down. She pivoted right into the missing context that had been overlooked in the previous segments of the show, unpacking how narratives had been shaped without acknowledging the full picture. And she held the floor not because she demanded it, but because the strength of her information made interruption impossible. She explained how certain arguments had been selectively presented and why Americans deserve to hear the entire truth, not just the sanitized version that fit political convenience. It wasn't a rant. It was a reconstruction of realities the audience had never been given access to. As she finished her point, Roberts tried to shift the topic again, but this time, he didn't push. He eased into it cautiously, carefully, because he knew the momentum wasn't his anymore, and Jasmine wasn't done before he could redirect. She added one final point, calm, measured, and devastating. A fact so crucial that the studio fell quiet. It wasn't a jab, It wasn't an opinion. It was a documented, verifiable detail that directly contradicted the narrative the show had been leaning toward. Roberts froze for half a second, not long, but long enough for viewers to notice. Then Jasmine leaned back, not triumphant, but composed, like someone who had simply done what she came to do: lay out the truth, uninterrupted, unfiltered, and unmistakably clear. And that's when the reaction began to shift. The panelists suddenly looked at her, not as a guest filling airtime, but as the person who had just flipped the entire conversation on its head. The host moved on, but the tone of the show wasn't the same anymore, not after what she revealed. Across social media, clips of the moment were already circulating. Some captioned it, "Jasmine ends the debate in one take." Others called it, "The moment Roberts realized he picked the wrong person to interrupt." But the most shared comment was the simplest: "She came with facts, and they weren't ready." What no one knew, yet what no one in the studio realized at the time was that Jasmine's final statement in that segment wasn't just a rebuttal, it was the first crack in a much bigger narrative that was about to unravel. Because what she said didn't just challenge the argument, it rewrote it. And the next part of the showdown would make that even clearer. What happened after Jasmine Crockett delivered that final, undeniable fact wasn't loud or dramatic cue. It completely changed the room. You could see it immediately in the panel's reactions. The energy shifted from controlled debate to something much more cautious. No one wanted to jump in too quickly because everyone understood one thing: the conversation had moved onto terrain Jasmine controlled completely. John Roberts, usually quick with a follow-up or redirection, hesitated. His pause was brief but noticeable. The kind of moment where a host recalculates what to say next to avoid walking directly into another factual correction. That single hesitation told viewers everything they needed to know about the strength of Jasmine's argument. But Jasmine didn't capitalize on the moment by gloating or spiking the conversation emotionally. Instead, she adjusted in the way she always does: measured, disciplined, and prepared. She sat forward just slightly, hands relaxed, signaling she wasn't done unfolding the information she had brought with her. When Roberts finally asked his next question, it came out more careful than confident. He tried to shift toward a broader topic, hoping to move away from the details Jasmine had just laid out. But she didn't let the conversation slide into vagueness. She immediately connected his new question back to the core facts she had already introduced, weaving them together so seamlessly that the panel couldn't escape the reality she was laying down. It was a masterclass in reframing, not dodging, not pivoting, but recentering the truth that everyone else seemed slightly hesitant to confront directly, as she explained how certain narratives had been manipulated. The camera cut to one of the analysts sitting across from her. He looked like someone trying to mentally reorganize everything he thought he knew about the issue. Another panelist, usually loud, stayed unusually quiet. Nobody wanted to challenge her, not because of fear, but because it was obvious she had done the homework that others skipped. Jasmine continued dissecting the timeline step by step, not rushed, not defensive, just precise. She highlighted public records, previous statements, and policy markers that had been overlooked. She quoted not politicians, but data. She didn't accuse, she clarified. And for viewers, clarity was more powerful than any confrontation. Roberts nodded along, but his nod wasn't agreement. It was acknowledgement. He knew she had the floor now, and there was no point pretending otherwise. Meanwhile, social media erupted again. People began posting clips of Jasmine leaning forward and speaking with unmistakable confidence. Others noted how Roberts had stepped back verbally, giving her room because he could tell she wasn't speaking from emotion. She was speaking from facts. Hashtags referencing the exchange began trending within minutes. Comments poured in. She brought the receipts again. Roberts underestimated her. Big mistake. This is why she scares them. They can't spin facts she already knows. As Jasmine continued, she took the conversation to a deeper level, exposing how certain political strategies relied on misinformation that most viewers never had the chance to see challenged on national television. She didn't accuse individual people of lying. She showed how systems and talking points had been shaped without acknowledging the full truth behind them. And then she did something crucial. She connected those overlooked details to the real-world consequences people face. It wasn't abstract. It wasn't theoretical. She made it tangible, showing how oversight, selective reporting, and political convenience directly affect the everyday lives of millions of Americans. That was the moment even the quiet panelist finally reacted. He leaned in, eyebrows raised, as Jasmine listed exact examples from communities across the country, communities often discussed but rarely spoken for accurately on national TV. Then came the shift that marked the turning point of the entire conversation. Jasmine introduced a piece of information, subtle but sharp, that no one else on the program had acknowledged. A detail tucked into a recent report, something that undermined a widely repeated talking point. Roberts blinked. The panel stiffened, and for a brief second, the studio looked frozen. Jasmine wasn't attacking anyone personally. She was exposing a gap in the narrative that was so wide. Ignoring it became impossible. The audience watching live knew something major had just happened. The live stream comments went wild again. People clipped the moment within seconds, posting it everywhere inside the studio. Roberts shifted his position, trying to move forward. But Jasmine had already laid down the evidence, and the panel knew it. They weren't just listening to her, they were relying on her to correct the record. They hadn't corrected themselves. When she finally paused, she didn't lean back triumphantly. She simply took a breath, giving space for the weight of her words to settle. It wasn't about the moment. It wasn't about winning. It was about making sure the facts were finally spoken aloud. Without interruption, without distortion, and without apology, Roberts thanked her quickly, quietly, and moved to the next guest. But the tone of the show was completely different now, more measured, more cautious, more aware. Because once Jasmine brought those facts to the table, nobody could pretend not to know them anymore. The moment the discussion moved away from Jasmine Crockett, it became immediately clear that the studio was still reacting to everything she had just laid out. Even as the next guest began speaking, the panelists weren't fully focused. Their expressions gave it away, half listening, half processing, because Jasmine had shifted the entire foundation of the conversation. But Jasmine, sitting calmly in her seat, remained composed. She didn't need the final word. She already had it as the program attempted to regain rhythm. Small details began revealing just how deeply her impact had landed. One analyst quietly flipped through his notes, looking for a counterpoint he never found. Another began scribbling on a notepad, something analysts do only when they realize the framing needs to change entirely. And Roberts, while trying to guide the show back on track, kept glancing toward Jasmine with the expression of someone who knew viewers were waiting for her next move, even though she wasn't speaking at that moment. Her presence shaped the tone of the discussion. Every argument introduced by another guest was now subconsciously compared to the precision Jasmine had displayed. It was a rare shift, the kind that happens only when someone brings undeniable truth into a space that usually thrives on talking points and spin. Then it happened. Roberts turned back to Jasmine for a final reflection, clearly hoping to close the discussion on a more neutral note. But the question he asked gave her exactly the opening she needed, not to escalate, not to argue, but to finish her message with the kind of clarity that would echo long after the cameras stopped rolling. She leaned forward slightly, her expression steady, and began laying out a final, tightly focused explanation that cut through the noise. She didn't rehash everything she had already said. Instead, she connected her earlier points to a larger truth, that political narratives fall apart when they're tested against facts, and that when elected officials or media personalities attempt to shape public opinion without acknowledging the full picture, people pay the price. There was no anger in her voice, just conviction as she spoke. The studio fell silent again, not because her words were dramatic, but because they were grounded. You could almost feel the tension thinning out, replaced by an uncomfortable recognition. She wasn't offering an opinion. She was revealing a reality that the others had danced around for far too long. The panel watched her, almost frozen. One analyst finally nodded mid-sentence, not because he agreed with every political stance she held, but because he couldn't deny the accuracy of her breakdown. Even the guest who had previously attempted to steer the discussion in a different direction was now sitting back, arms crossed, taking in her final points with a kind of reluctant respect. When Jasmine finished her closing thought, there was a brief silence, real one, not the performative pause TV hosts use for effect. This was the kind of silence that happens when a person delivers something so solid, so well supported, that there is nothing left to push back on. Roberts quickly stepped in, thanking her with a tone noticeably more respectful than earlier in the show. He knew the audience felt the shift. He knew Jasmine had reframed the entire conversation without raising her voice, without attacking anyone personally, and without losing her composure. And viewers at home, they exploded. Live chats lit up with messages praising her control, her depth, and the way she refused to be minimized the moment Roberts tried to interrupt her earlier in the broadcast. Social media reactions were instant and overwhelming. She owned that conversation without even trying. I've never seen Roberts sit that still. Crockett just fact-checked. The whole panel live. This is why she's becoming one of the most influential voices in Congress. Clips from the exchange spread across platforms within minutes. Some highlighted the exact moment Roberts attempted to cut her off. Others focused on the shift in tone once her facts hit the table. A few fan accounts even slowed down her final points and added captions, emphasizing every precise detail she brought forward. Political commentators outside the show weighed in next. Some praised her discipline, some marveled at her preparedness, and a few pointed out how rare it was to see a representative step into a national broadcast and control the narrative with such ease. Inside the studio, the staff wrapped up the program, but the intensity lingered. Roberts shook Jasmine's hand warmly, a subtle acknowledgement that she had outperformed the expectations of the format. One of the analysts approached her afterward with a quiet, "You brought the facts today, appreciate that." Another simply nodded as he walked by, still processing. Jasmine gathered her notes, not with the air of someone who had one, but with the quiet confidence of someone who knows the truth speaks for itself. She didn't have to boast or celebrate. She had delivered clarity, and people felt it as she stepped off the set. The impact of what she said continued to ripple across social media, across political circles, and across the viewers who finally saw someone cut through the noise with precision and purpose. And that was the real moment, the moment the conversation stopped being about who talked the loudest and started being about who brought the truth.